And I'm Keith DeCandido, and it's an all-new, all-different, all-exciting, all-innovative, or at least an all-new, episode of The Chronic Rift. Tonight we're going to take a look at science fact in science fiction. How much S does there need to be in SF? That's for our roundtable discussion.
And we have two distinguished authors here to talk with us about it, but that's in a little while. First off, a well-known science fiction and fantasy store has closed its doors for good. A Change of Hobbit in Santa Monica, California, had its last day of business on February 27th of this year. The store had been one of the pioneers of such specialty establishments when it opened back in 1971. Now this store is not to be confused with another Change of Hobbit in Berkeley, which continues to do well. They are not related to each other.
Inquiring minds want to know about Star Trek The Next Generation. Apparently, Patrick Stewart, who plays Captain Picard on the show, was on the cover recently, along with Jennifer Hedrick. Hedrick played Picard's lust interest in the third season episode of The Next Generation, Captain's Holiday, and went on to become Arnie Becker's wife on L.A. Law. According to the Inquirer, they are engaged in a torrid affair that is breaking up Stewart's 25-year marriage. The other rumor we've heard about Star Trek from the tabloids is that Home Alone star Macaulay Culkin is supposedly going to be in Star Trek VI. The only other rumor we've heard about Star Trek VI is that Spock is supposed to fall in love in the story. Now, what I'd like to see is Spock falling in love with Macaulay Culkin, but they probably won't do that.
The book note for this week is the release this month of World Spirits by Aileen Boucher-Caplan. Set in the universe of Chiron, the story deals with the efforts of a group of people as they try to stop the exploitation of a planet that can and will fight back. The book is published by Baen Books for $4.50. This week we begin a brand new feature. Joining us now is the Man in Black himself, with a look at the latest goings-on in the world of home video. Hello, Man in Black.
Hi. The big news in the video world is the release at the end of this month of the mega hit Ghost to videotape. Also causing quite a bit of consternation is the price, at a hefty $99.95. People in the industry are wondering why Paramount is charging so much for this tape. It's a certainty that Paramount doesn't believe this tape won't sell, not after the $200 million that Ghost took in at the box office. Basically, the studio is putting the bite on the rental stores, both big and small, and I can't think of a video store that won't order at least one copy for rent, and there are a lot of video stores. Paramount hasn't learned from its success with Top Gun and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, or from the success of Touchstone's Pretty Woman, all of which were priced for sell-through. Instead, they've taken to pushing the envelope on prices as they did with The Hunt for Red October, also priced at a whopping $99.95. Well, beta fans are finally getting their revenge. Films like Darkman, Hunt for Red October, and the upcoming Ghost are coming out at $29.95. Also, if you'd like, Laserdisc is also coming out at $39.95. The Laserdiscs are an improvement over the beta and VHS formats, and that many of these films are available in the letterbox format, which is preferred on large screens. On a happier note, the J2 Corporation has released 4 episodes of Space 1999 to videotape at the sell-through price of $14.95 per tape. The 4 episodes released are Voyager's Return, Matter of Life and Death, Earthbound with Christopher Lee and Roy Dotrice of Beauty and the Beast, and The Guardian of Puri with Catherine Schell in her first appearance of Space 1999. Also available for fans of Jerry Anderson's television series, Today Home Entertainment still has available 4 volumes of UFO tapes with 2 episodes per tape, priced at a very reasonable $24.95 per tape. From Family Home Entertainment, there are 2 compilation tapes of Captain Scarlet available and 3 tapes of the Thunderbirds, each at $39.95. Finally, long delayed by Marvel Comics and their corporate parent, the Punisher movie is going directly to tape. It'll be in stores in April at a price of $92.95. Guess who has to pay for the film industry's latest blunder? The real crime is that video and comic stores that waited for legal copies instead of buying and selling bootleg copies at $15 to $25 are now being rewarded by being gouged for a title that may rent well if all of our customers haven't seen the film on bootleg tapes. I'm the Man in Black, and this has been the Video Report.
Thank you, Man in Black. And remember, you can find the tapes he mentioned, as well as many at Omega Zone, one of our sponsors, or at other specialty stores. This week also marks the return of an old feature, one that hasn't seen the light of day in weeks. Here's Keith with his comic art commentary.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and boy, is it good to be back with comic art commentary. First, some news. The comic strip is sort of the second cousin once removed from the comic book. Lots of people read them in their daily paper, and the bestseller list is full of the accumulations published by the large book publishing houses, especially Andrews and McNeil, who publishes the Doonesbury, Calvin and Hobbes, and Farside collections. But comic book publishers, especially Eclipse Books, Fantagraphics Books, Kitchen Sink Press, and NBM, are publishing accumulations of classic comic strips from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and the 60s. Eclipse is publishing Walt Kelly's Pogo and George Harriman's Crazy Cat, as well as a volume of Frank Frazetta's Johnny Comet racing strip. Fantagraphics either has done or is doing E.C. Seeger's Popeye, Winsor McKay's Little Nemo in Slumberland, Harold Gray's Little Orphan Annie, and Hal Foster's Prince Valiant. NBM has been doing this longer than anybody. 1984 was when they started, with Milton Caniff's Terry and the Pirates. They just finished the daily strips of that. The Sunday volume has just come out last month. They also did Roy Crane's Wash Tubs and Captain Easy. Finally, Kitchen Sink is giving us Ernie Bushmiller's Nancy and a mammoth 54-volume, 11-year project that will collect all of Al Cap's beloved Lil Abner strip. Kitchen Sink is also doing their own versions of Caniff's Terry and Harriman's Crazy Cat. This has caused a great deal of consternation with NBM and Eclipse, who are publishing the same thing already. Their complaints are ethical. The material is public domain, so Kitchen Sink has every legal right to print it. It's their moral right that's being called into question. Also, their business sense is being called into question. The market for these books is not particularly large. By dividing it like this, they're just hurting all three publishers. In any event, the latest editions of these books should be available in your local comic shop, especially the larger ones. And all four publishers do direct mail orders, so if you write them for a catalog, they'll send you one and you can order it that way. This week's comic in review is William Messner-Loebs' Bad Weather, Volume 2 of the Journey Saga, published by Fantagraphics Books. The first volume was published in 1987 and was called Tall Tales. It collects Messner-Loebs' Journey series, which was started in 1983 and has been running on and off since. It's been mostly off lately, as Messner-Loebs has been busy doing work on mainstream comics, especially for DC. Journey tells the story of Joshua McAllister, who was a trapper in early 19th century Michigan, a frontier rife with story possibilities. Old Josh mostly travels alone, but he encounters all kinds of weird folks out there in the wilderness. Some various Native Americans, fellow pioneers, fellow trappers, utopian Germans who are trying to find a new home, a trio of not too bright and inept revolutionaries, and the spirit of a dead Spaniard. The stories are a great deal of fun, and Josh is a wonderful main character. His laid-back, dry wit, and easy style belie a terrible ferocity, and it's a great deal of fun to just watch him go through life. There's a story that's inserted in the middle that is a prose story. It deals with stories around a campfire. It has two different stories told in different perspectives, and it's very interesting. This is a wonderful book. As good as Messner's work for DC is, this is far, far superior to any of it. Bad Weather is published by Fantagraphics Books, 98 pages, $9.95, and is available both at comic shops and directly by mail from the publisher. That's it for Comic Art Commentary this week. Next week, I will be taking a look at some gallery exhibitions of comic art, as well as the aforementioned Johnny Comet by Frank Frazetta. And that's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Keith.
You're welcome, Andrea.
This week's memorable moment comes to us from Valerie Wingfield, who writes, "My recollections of an excellent science fiction series is The Outer Limits. This series was noted for its solid storylines and fine special effects. Underneath each episode was a theme, for example, peace or some other cause. One particular episode, which was a favorite of mine, was A Demon with a Glass Hand, starring Robert Culp. The scene where Culp took off his glove to reveal a glass hand was memorable. There were other excellent episodes of The Outer Limits, but this particular one is one of my favorites, written by an excellent writer, Harlan Ellison. For your thoughtfulness in writing to us, we have for you two books by Brian Aldiss, Man in His Time, with a really funky-looking cover, and by DJ Savage, The Glass Lady. And remember, if you have a memorable moment or any comments or thoughts on the show, write to us here at the Rift.
It's time. And the hand, my hand, told me what to do. What can I do? Who are they?
Programming data insufficient on question 2. Who are they? Random collation of possibilities. Question 1. What can I do? In order of factors of success are as follows. A. Each pursuer wears a gold medallion. remove these medallions. B, the time mirror permits only 2 travelers at one time, but they are replenishable. If possible, destroy the mirror. C, stay alive. Above all, stay alive. Destiny is in your whole hand. D, I am incomplete. I can serve you better if I am complete.
Science fiction is called science fiction because, theoretically, well, it has science in it. SF is literature of change. It takes the status quo and makes an alteration to it, and usually the change is scientific in nature. However, not every SF writer is scientifically trained. Some have no knowledge of science beyond high school physics, and sometimes it really shows. Tonight we will examine science fact in science fiction, and try to answer the question of how important the science is in the fiction's success. With me and Andrea to discuss it are on my left, Marina Frants, who is a student at MIT. She last appeared in a discussion of Quantum Leap, and is here once again to talk about this. On the other side of Andrea is Charles Platt, an author of both fiction and nonfiction in the genre, including the recent novel The Silicon Man. And remotely from his home in Florida is Ben Bova, who is a renowned hard science writer of numerous books, as well as an award-winning editor for various magazines. You there, Ben?
I'm right here.
Okay, we're all set. Marina, as a reader, how important is it for you for the book to be scientifically accurate, or at least scientifically plausible?
Well, a lot of it depends on your expectations before you pick up the book. There are some books that are marketed as hard science fiction, and if you pick up that book, you really expect it to be as accurate as humanly possible. There are others that are marketed as soft or anthropological or sociological science fiction, and with them you give a little leeway. And there are certain inaccuracies and impossibilities that science fiction readers just accept as a given in books. Faster than light travel, for example, and time travel and things like that. I mean, most writers don't even bother justifying faster than light travel in their books anymore. They just say that it happens, and the readers just accept it and say, well, that's part of the science fiction universe. But to make up for that, every other bit of science in a book has to be perfectly accurate. Because if the little things start breaking up, you're not going to believe the big things. You're going to say, well, I don't believe these aliens because they're much too tall and they're breaking the cube square law, so I'm not going to believe there's faster than light travel either. I'm not going to believe anything in this book.
Do you think that it's important for writers to try to be scientifically accurate? I mean, what if the audience doesn't know? I mean, if the audience is going to accept things like faster than light speed and is going to accept things that don't really exist, I mean, is it that important for the writers to try to be scientifically accurate?
Well, see, you can't count on the audience not knowing, because in a science fiction audience, someone will always know what you're getting wrong and will write a nasty letter to the author saying, you got this wrong.
Or to the magazine, if it's in a magazine. Did you have a problem like that, Ben, when you were working for Analog and Omni? The kind of things
Well, I think you're really setting up some false distinctions here.
Oh, all right.
A science fiction story, that is a story in which science is an integral part of the plot, should be as accurate as a historical novel or any other kind of writing. If you read a novel about the Civil War in which Abraham Lincoln was described as 5'2" and bald, you feel the author probably didn't do his homework at the very least. In science fiction stories, the science should be as meticulously researched and as accurately presented as any other part of a story.
Well, what if you have...
It really isn't very difficult to do. I mean, there's nothing arcane about it. Many, many people understand the basics of science. Anybody can pick it up. I'm regarded as a hard science fiction writer. I don't have a degree in the sciences. My degree is in journalism. I've learned science by reading and talking to people who are scientists.
Well, what about somebody like, say, well, Harlan Ellison, for example, to give a rather vocal example, he's talked about how he doesn't really know anything about science and doesn't see that interferes.
Actually, Ellison says he's not a science fiction author, so he's
there's that,
a particularly good example. I mean, he quite happily admits he's scientifically completely ignorant. So, I mean, It seems to me it's a question of what the reader expects. And obviously, if you pick up a book with a dragon on the cover, you're not expecting to learn anything about the real world. The reason I started writing science fiction was because I wanted to write the kinds of things that I wanted to read. And what I wanted to read was going to tell me something about the future and my place in it and what might happen. And so I was kind of a serious reader in that sense, even though some of the ideas might have seemed far-fetched. The whole emphasis has changed in the last 20 years. There are a lot of very unserious readers. They are amply catered to. But I still want to write the first kind of book, because that's what I still want to read.
Mr. Platt, do you think there's a difference between the people who write science fiction who started out as scientists or started out as doctors? Because in the past, since maybe the early 80s or mid-80s, there have been a lot of authors who were actual scientists and then said, oh, wait a second, I can make some extra money, and then decided writing science fiction books, whereas there are some people who are authors, decide to write about science fiction and then do the research. Do you see the difference?
I would say there are more failed scientists writing science fiction than there are successful scientists doing it on the side. And I include myself in the first group. There are also sort of people like Ben, who are just intelligent people who actually Ben downplays his science background. He does have a little bit more than that. But you don't have to be, as he says, a Nobel laureate to write science fiction. You just have to have a rational attitude towards technology, which is, becoming rare, but does still exist.
You also have to sit down and look up things once in a while, which a lot of writers today just don't bother to do.
Yeah.
Especially, in movies. Movies are so much worse than books when it comes to that.
That's a whole other thing.
Well, in movies, you can have lots of special effects, and you're going to be so dazzled by them that you're not really asking how it's happening. You're just going, wow, look at the pretty colors.
Can I get a word in?
Oh, sure.
If you're talking about movies, let's make a real distinction here. Science fiction movies bear the same relationship to science fiction as it's written as Popeye does to naval history. Science fiction movies have practically nothing at all to do with real science fiction. They are comic strips. They're intended to be comic strips. They're aimed at people who can barely read comic strips, and they make a fortune because there are a lot more idiots in the world than geniuses.
That's a fair assessment of it. I mean, when you see, it always makes my teeth hurt whenever I see something like on Star Trek with the ship making noise as it goes through space, making bank turns in a vacuum, fun stuff like that. It's frustrating.
Well, I think it's funny, in movies, if we're talking about scientific accuracy, there was this big trend in the 50s to have movies sort of be scientifically accurate. The closest they got to being scientifically accurate was atomic energy, and atomic energy was bad. So you'd have giant ants walking around, and these bad movies, Fiend Without a Face, all these things happening where either there was some strange demented scientist who had made something go awry, or else were, I don't know, some sort of nuclear thing. One thing that I've noticed is that it used to be. Please, Mr. Bova, excuse me if I'm talking about movies briefly. The focus used to be more on atomic energy, and that was the thing that people were afraid of. And so it was like people. There was always some atomic plant, and well, the government's doing some atomic testing around here, and no, I don't know why the water is green. Something like that.
I think it's much worse than that. I think the whole attitude of the motion picture industry in all of these films is that science is bad.
Can you give a specific example?
You'd take a look at a movie like Alien, and it turns out the scientist is the villain. You take a look at such a charming film as Time Bandits, and God is a dotty old man who's interested in petunias, while the devil wants to know about computers and lasers. The message these films keep giving the audience is that science is bad. And this message is being brought to you by people who are using the most up-to-date computers and technological means of producing those special effects. I think it's a living lie, and it doesn't serve our society very well at all.
To jump back to the books for a second, your book, The Silicon Man, was based on a particular branch of computer
Okay, the
research.
one area of science I know most about is computers, so that's what I chose when I decided to write a factually correct science fiction novel. Yeah.
What I'm curious, was the story based on, did you get the idea based on that particular extrapolation of computer technology, or did you get the story first and decide to use it as, I mean, which came first there?
Well, there are various books out there which play seriously with the idea of taking the brain to pieces, which I find an encouraging idea, because once we know how to take the brain to pieces, then maybe we can be immortal. And some of them adopt a biological angle, some of them adopt an angle more looking at the brain as a network of components not that different from those inside a computer. I prefer that point of view because I know more about that. But if someone was going to offer me immortality, I would take any option. So I was saying, what would it be like if we could dump intelligence into a computer with a whole lot of other people too, so you could have your own world in there, and you could build anything in there and it would feel real, just like everyday life. Or you could improve on it, which would be even more interesting, and you could make copies of yourself and send them off other places. There are all sorts of possibilities, which I expect actually to be feasible maybe 100 or 150 years ahead.
Do you think immortality is a good idea? You would like to be?
A good idea?
You would like to be
It's an idea.
I think I heard in there that you said it was a good idea. I just wanted to check.
Is anyone here in favor of death? I mean, that's the alternative. And if so,
Depends on who you're talking about.
favor of their own death, then.
Oh, that's a different matter.
Yeah.
While we're on the subject of computers, field of artificial intelligence has had a huge effect on science fiction recently.
Not just recently. I mean, you go back to the 50s and it had...
Yeah, well, relatively recently. But all of a sudden, everybody's doing sentient computers in their books. So the general idea among science fiction authors now seems to be that if you just make a computer big enough, all of a sudden it'll come to life and start writing poetry and discussing Nietzsche or whatever. And I think at this point it's getting a little tiresome. And sometimes it's done very well. I mean, you get classic examples like Mike and the Moon is a Harsh Mistress. And
but don't you think it's a bit bogus? I mean,
yeah,
I haven't seen an artificial intelligence program that's remotely convincing.
I haven't either. You know, the AI people at MIT are always, you know, acting as if they're just on the brink of coming up
Been on the brink for the last 20 years.
intelligence computer.
Just another couple of $1 million, and I'm really... You know.
Personally, I think that if they want to do, it's maybe remotely possible that one of these days we'll do it, but they're not going to do it by sitting around and writing bogus books on pseudo-philosophy, which is what Marvin Minsky's been doing at MIT for the past few years.
I think it's related to what Mr. Bova was saying about how people, how scientists are being portrayed as evil. Because to the common man, well, scientists, well, what do they do? Well, we don't understand. If we don't understand what they're doing, then they're probably doing something bad.
Yeah,
it's the same thing with computers. People don't feel very comfortable with computers, so there'll be episodes with Star Trek, and the M5 is taking over the ship, Captain. I don't know how this happened.
Every other week, the computer that endangers the ship.
Always things that, what I was trying to say before was, first, it used to be atomic energy, and atomic energy was bad, and so something bad was going to happen. It shifted more to something like computers and androids. So now it's either, I mean, you have HAL in 2001 and the computer that won't let the ship go, and lots of stories and, lots of literature too with computers and androids that are taking over things and people feeling vulnerable. I think it's that people are actually, maybe unconsciously, a little bit afraid. And the writers and filmmakers can sort of prey on that and go, oh, let's see, what are you afraid of? Okay, let's make a big movie where it happens.
But, it's like Ben said, these same people are writing these books on IBM PS2000 word processor, that is enabling them to write that much faster and get things out and make it all nice and neat on their nifty laser printers.
I'm not saying that they're afraid of it. I'm saying that they think that we're a little bit afraid of it.
Well, you can scare people very easily with anything that they don't understand, and it's a very convenient plot device.
And there's a lot of techno
There's a lot of lazy writers. So, I mean, put that together, and it's very easy to see why this happens.
And so you get things like in Hyperion and Fall of Hyperion, evil AIs out to destroy humanity.
Right. Which is, it's especially frustrating because you'll get things in otherwise perfectly good books, and you get this one thing that is is really, yeah, detracts from the rest of the story because you know that it's ridiculous, you know it isn't possible, and it takes away from the enjoyment of it, which is a great deal of part of the fun in it.
My notion in The Silicon Man was that I didn't believe in artificial intelligence that much, so I was much more concerned with just simply replicating human intelligence bit for bit, and that was the idea of the book, and I think that just about is plausible. So
yeah.
I stayed within what I consider to be the mandate that a science fiction author has.
Right.
Ben, do you have any other comments you'd like to throw out here?
I think it's important to realize that science fiction is, as a field of writing and publishing, is enormously wide, and you can have all kinds of different types of stories, some that don't have a shred of science in them, others that are so technologically oriented that you practically need a computer to read them. But in each and every story, no matter what its type, the writer must do the best possible job at getting the information straight.
Okay, I have to cut you off here.
Made of Harlan Ellison a little earlier. Harlan is not a scientist.
I have to cut you off here, Ben. We're being given the wrap it up sign. We're being given the wrap it up sign here.
In one of Harlan's stories, you can be absolutely sure that he has researched it. He has looked it up, whether it's the color of the robe Queen Elizabeth wore in her coronation, or the power density of a carbon dioxide laser.
Excuse me, Ben, I'm sorry. We have to cut you off. We're getting the wrap it up sign here.
Well, I've got to leave anyway.
Okay.
It's been fun.
Thanks a lot, Ben.
My pleasure.
Okay. We'll see you next week when we talk about Beauty and the Beast. Good night.
This episode was sponsored in part by Tor Books, a publisher of fantasy and science fiction books available at your local bookstore, including White Jenna by Jane Yolen, and The Red Tape War by Jack L. Chalker, Mike Resnick, and George Alec Effinger. Both now available, as well as the upcoming Xenocide by Orson Scott Card, to be released in August. Comics Interview, the magazine where both the fans and the pros turn to see who's who and how it's done. For a free sample copy or special discount on any Comics Interview publication, write to Comics Interview, 234 5th Avenue, Suite 301, New York, New York, 10001. Analog, science fiction, science fact magazine, the leader in the scientifically plausible for over 60 years. Subscribe to Analog and enjoy out-of-this-world reading issue after issue. To receive 8 issues for $12.97, send check or money order to Analog, P.O. Box 7061, Department MUSC-0, Red Oak, Iowa, 51591. Omega Zone, a store specializing in comic books and video movie rentals, located at 46 8th Avenue between West 4th and Horatio in Manhattan. Telephone 212-645-6941.